so it's Lent, right? It's Lent. Anybody giving up anything for Lent this year? Nobody? Nothing. Okay. All right. We're good. Anybody giving up made a decision to give anything up for Lent this year? Social media. Amen. Here, take my phone, right? Anything else? Anybody else? French fries. Now there's a sacrifice. Candy. What is wrong with you people? And desserts. Wow. All at one time? All right. So, okay, maybe not. Maybe you're like me, like on Wednesday, you're like, I'm going to give up this and that and that and this and this. And then by, Thursday, you're like, oh, well, I tried. So like today's like a good day to reboot and restart, like, okay, I was going to do this or whatever. But today's like the official day. During Lent, actually Sundays don't count. Did you know that? No, you didn't know that. Yeah, like Sundays don't count. You can eat dessert on Sundays during Lent. But today can be like your really for sure start Lent day if you want it to be. So since we were so responsive that time, let's do something else that's responsive. So what I want you to do is turn to your neighbor and say, so, what's Lent? And then tell them. All right, go for it. Go ahead. Okay, all right. So I find it really interesting that when I was like, so what'd you give up for Lent? It was like crickets and a couple of kids. But when I'm like, turn your neighbors like, so what's Lent? It's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Like everybody starts talking about it. Like, interesting how we know all about it, but are we doing it, right? I don't know. I don't know what you guys were talking about, actually. I can't hear you. But anyway, so hopefully somewhere during that time when you were talking, something came out like Lent is a time of the year when we intentionally, that's an important word, when we intentionally examine, that's another big word, our spiritual lives by praying, fasting, meaning giving something up, and self-reflection. Like looking in the spiritual mirror, right? Hopefully something like that came up when you were talking. So Lent is, why Lent? Because Andrew, I've been sick this week. Like our family, except for my lovely wife, we've had the plague. I mean, Moses was there, everything. It was bad. It was bad. I'm telling you, it was really bad. We're all better. But so I missed Ash Wednesday, right? And I noticed that Andrew, he was in here. I don't know if he's still in here or not. Anyway, Andrew posted something on Facebook about, Ash Wednesday. It's it's kind of a sad time, especially when you're a ministry, you have to clean up when it's all over with, I guess. But like Lent, Lent's kind of this, nobody's like, yes, Lent is coming. Nobody's that way. I don't think. Like you shouldn't be that way if you are. Lent's just not like Christmas. It's like the opposite almost. It's this very different time of the church year. And as a minister, you're like, oh, I got to make everybody feel guilty about their sin and all this stuff, I mean, right? Nobody's looking forward to that. But we should be. Not in the same way we look forward to, other things. But Lent matters. It really does. It's huge. It's as important a time of the year as any of the other holidays and things that we do. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, when it comes to self-reflection and thinking about our sinfulness and that kind of thing, we don't normally spend much time doing that. Right? I mean, we really don't. We're just doing our thing. We're just doing life. We don't, at least I don't. I don't think we spend a lot of time really looking at ourselves, really looking, examining our spiritual lives. We just don't spend a lot of time doing that. It's like golf for me. I love it. I just don't get to do it, right? So we don't do it very often. And honestly, we're not very good at it, probably. You might think you are. If so, there's another point in the message in here that's probably for you. But we're probably not very good at it because we don't do it very often. And so, once a year, kind of like Evening with Friends, once a year, we have Lent, which is a time to kind of force us to do this spiritual practice that otherwise we wouldn't do it. You know, it's like washing your clothes and folding your laundry. I mean, I foresee some of that in my future here pretty soon, but I'm not looking forward to it. You know, it's not something I'm like, oh, I can't wait for church to be over today so I can go do those, you know. No. Lent is like that, but Lent is important because we don't usually spend time doing this. All right. Secondly, Lent is kind of like a spiritual checkup. No? Anybody ever go to the doctor for a checkup? It's okay to raise your hands in here. Do y'all never interact with people in here? Like, seriously, I'm going to have to talk to Tyler and you know. So Lent is kind of like a spiritual checkup. So we're fortunate we have insurance, you know, and every year, you know, so we don't have to pay a whole lot more. We have to go to the doctor and they have to check us out, right? And so, you know, I went recently and I go in and the doctor he does a little thing. What's that called? What is that? Like makes your leg do this, you know? Whatever, reflexes. I thought it had a doctor name or something. But anyway, so he does that, and he does all this stuff, and, you know, and thankfully, you know, at the end he says, well, is there anything I need to know? I'm like, nope, can I go? Yep, you're good. You're out of here. But once a year, we kind of have to do that now. So Lent is kind of like a spiritual checkup, right? Do I have to go every year? Probably not. But what if I go for a few years and miss something? Lent's kind of like, you know, checking up, checking in, checking out where we are spiritually. Because if we don't do that, just imagine what could happen after some period of time if we haven't done that, right? We might not be as healthy spiritually as we think we are. And then another reason that Lent is significant is because it's a time for us to recalibrate our lives spiritually. Lent is not just about us looking in a mirror at our lives or our spiritual lives and going, hey, look at me. You know? That's part of it. That's just a starting point for it. Lent is about recalibrating our spiritual lives. So it's not enough just to go, yep, I'm a sinner. Yeah, I'm pretty bad. I'm pretty broken and messed up. That's a great place to start. But Lent is about trying to recalibrate our spiritual lives. And so, anybody ever flown on an airplane? Never mind. Y'all don't raise your hands. Forget it. So if you've ever flown on an airplane for more than 30 minutes, I don't know anything about being a pilot. I'm sure some of you are experts at it. But anyway, airplanes usually are on autopilot. You know? Like the pilot's just kind of sitting up there making sure everybody's cool. But planes go into autopilot in most cases, especially if you're on a really long trip. And so they set the destination for wherever you're going. Where do you want to go? Let's go to Italy. I'd like to go there. So let's go to Rome, somewhere. Let's go over to Italy somewhere. So the plane sets, autopilot for Italy and it flies for a little ways, you're flying in the air. And autopilot checks in I'm guessing about every 30 minutes, maybe it's shorter than that. I really don't know. But what I do know is whether it's 15 or 20 or 30 minutes or an hour, while autopilot is working and the plane's flying, the plane's going this way, the world is moving underneath it. Go figure, right? And so what happens is, after about 30 minutes or so, autopilot checks back in and has to recalculate and has to readjust the direction that it's going in, because if not, it's going to go in the wrong direction. And so Lent is not just about going, I'm going in the wrong direction. How about it? It's also about trying to recalculate our spiritual lives. Right? It's about trying to get our spiritual lives moving in the direction and in the place that they need to be heading in, right? And so we have to first check in and see where we are and where we're going. But then the other part of that is about recalculating so that we get our spiritual lives moving back in the direction that they need to be going into. Okay, and so when we look through the scriptures, there's one verse where Paul is writing, and he's just being really personal, I think. This is a great example of why we need to do this. This is a great example of why Lent is so important. And it might not be your favorite thing, like Christmas where you get toys, and I don't know what that has to do with Jesus anyway, but Lent is just as significant. And Paul tells us in this passage in Romans 7, Paul, think about Paul, like he wrote half the Bible, okay? So this is Paul, who's like, you might think of this really awesome Christian or whatever. Listen to what he says. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 7. He says, I don't really understand myself. For I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I am doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. And he's talking about some kind of Old Testament stuff there a little bit. So I am not the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. He's not passing the buck here. He's not passing the buck. So I am not the one. So I am not the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. Wow. That's Paul. Can anybody relate to that? Like nobody wants to really raise their hand again? Can you relate to that? That's Paul. Right? That's Paul saying, there's all these things that I know I should do, and I don't do them. And there's some things over here that I shouldn't do, and I do these things. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds crazy. And, in my notes here, what I'm supposed to say to y'all right here is, what this means is, y'all, something's wrong with us. Something's wrong with us. That's what Paul is saying. Paul's not just talking about his experience. Paul is kind of describing the condition, the spiritual condition of all of us. And he's saying, y'all, something is wrong with me. Something's not right here. But we read that, and if we're honest, and we let the text speak to us, we go, that's me too. That happens to me. What is wrong with me? What is going on here? We say things we shouldn't say. We do things we shouldn't do, or that we really don't want to do. We don't say things and do things that we, wish we did or would like to. And part of this brokenness, this what's wrong with us that happens, is that it's almost like we're addicted to all these different things that are really so meaningless. Just think about how we spend our time. I mean, have you ever had a day in your life where you absolutely did and said everything you wanted to do and say that day? Or didn't do or say some of the things you didn't want to do? I mean, have you ever had like the perfect day that way? We don't, I have a few aspirations for after church today, I'm looking forward to folding clothes. I mean, it could happen that I go home and the couch is calling my name, right? And I don't know. We'll see, right? But we're addicted. Somebody said they were giving up social media. We're addicted to technology. We're addicted to entertainment, being entertained. We're addicted to shopping. Like, who wants to sign up for not buying anything other than like groceries for the next 40 days? Nothing. No books. Yeah, some guys are like, hey, can we do that? Honey, hey, that sounds great. Right? Nothing, like not buying a thing. Nothing. Just groceries. No cafe, latte, Buena Vista, whatever. I mean, we're addicted to being successful. Oh, man, we are so addicted to that. I want to be successful. I want to do a good job. We're addicted to winning. We want to win. Right? And as we saw from the election last year, we're addicted to being right. We just got to be right. I mean, it doesn't matter who's wrong because we have some alternative facts on that anyway, but I don't know. But I mean, we're addicted to being, we want to be right. Let's be honest. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just picking on all of us, right? And the thing is that we know in our heart of hearts, the place where God lives inside of each one of us, that place, we know that all these things are meaningless. We know that all these places where we spend our time and all these things, we know they're meaningless. And yet we still do them anyway. We're messed up. Right? I mean, we are. So we do these things because we're broken, right? And the Christian word for that, which I'm okay with, but some people aren't, but the Christian word for that is sinful. We're sinful. That's why we're doing Lent. You know, because of our sinfulness, that's a part of our human condition. We don't do things we want to do and we ought to do, and we do things we don't want to do and we shouldn't do. And we call it sinfulness. Or we can call it brokenness. Or, I think another way to, the Bible talks a lot about our heart. And when the Bible talks about our heart, especially in the Old Testament, it's not talking about our heart that pumps in our chest. It's kind of talking about the center, the spiritual center of our being. And one way I think that's helpful for us to think about this is to think of our heart as our spiritual operating system. Now, some of you are like, ooh. And then some of you are like, what? Okay. But let's think of our heart as our spiritual operating system. And I don't know if you're a Mac guy or a PC gal or whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you've ever owned a computer or a cell phone or something like that, then either A, it's probably had a virus, right? What happens when it gets a virus? You're like, delete, 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 and it keeps typing or whatever, Like, they don't listen. They mess up. Or it's like when you have your computer and you haven't updated it in like 3 years, and things just don't work. And you're like, I don't understand. What's wrong with this computer? It's not, it needs to be recalibrated. It needs to be updated, right? And so our heart is kind of like our spiritual operating system. And it's broken. And we're broken. And it needs to be reset, right? It needs to be recalibrated. But the thing is, we can't reset it ourselves. That's kind of a big point. We can't reset it ourselves. Wouldn't that be great? If we could just press the fix button and we were okay? And we might think that, and we might do things sometimes that make us feel like we can do that, but we can't do that. Which is one of the reasons why we go into the Psalms, and we could read all the Psalms, but David wrote these Psalms, this guy named David, and he wrote one in particular, one verse, Psalm 51:10, and look at what he says. And this is probably after a very difficult time in his life, some things he was wrestling with spiritually. Listen to what he says. He says, "Create in me a new heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Create in me a new heart, O God, and renew a right spirit in me. David knows that he is so broken and he has so messed up beyond what he is capable of fixing on his own, that he is calling out to God and saying, hey, I need my spiritual operating system is messed up, and I need you to fix it. I can't fix it. So Lent is about our need and our desire for a new heart. Lent is not just about acknowledging our sinfulness, acknowledging our brokenness. It's also about doing something about it. And that's where God comes in, because we can't fix it on our own, right? Lent is about our willingness to acknowledge our sinfulness, those dark places in our lives, those broken places in our lives that cause our spiritual operating system to malfunction. And here's the thing. It can be really hard. In fact, it is really hard. Giving up chocolate, that's pretty hard. Giving up sugar, that's tough. Like, try it for a couple of days and you'll see. That's difficult. But to really do the deep work of looking at our lives and what's controlling our lives and what we can't say no to and what we can't stop saying yes to, and writing those things down and then asking ourselves, why am I this way? Because I like going to the mall every day, 3 times a day. But I like Starbucks coffee and whatever. But I like it. It's hard. It's hard when we start asking ourselves these kinds of questions. So I told you I was going to go long, but I'm going to have to figure this out. All of that's just background. all of that is just to try to get us somewhat on the same page of thinking about what Lent is and why we do it and what it's for, and to help us to see that this time of the year that we're in, it matters. It's huge. It's amazingly important for our spiritual lives. And it's not okay for us to just go through the motions. Well, I'm going to give up marshmallows because I don't really eat a lot of marshmallows. And no, we can do so much more. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to go to the main passage that I want us to take a look at this morning, and that is, and this is kind of the classic story about Jesus. It was when he was tempted, and this is where we get the idea of 40 days of Lent and going into the wilderness, and this idea of going into the wilderness of our hearts and sort of examining our lives. So I'm going to read this passage from Matthew chapter 4, and this is from when Jesus was, shortly after he was baptized, he went into the wilderness, and he was tempted. So here's what it says. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and nights he fasted and became very hungry. During that time the devil came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." I mean, he's hungry, right? But Jesus told him, "No. The Scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." So that didn't work. So then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple. And he said, "If you are really the Son of God, jump off. For the Scriptures say, he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." And Jesus responded, "The Scriptures also say, you must not test the Lord your God." So then the next time, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said, "I will give it all to you," he said, "if you will kneel down and worship me." And then Jesus said, "Get out of here, Satan. For the Scriptures say, you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil went away, and angels came and took care of Jesus. Even Jesus needed some help getting through that spiritual point in his life. So I want to say a couple things about this passage. I have a whole lot to say, but I'm going to kind of give you the Cliff Note version, all right? The first thing I want to do is I want us to look at what Satan did there. I want us to take a look at what Satan was doing when Jesus was in the wilderness, right, in that time in his life. And let's think about some of these strategies that Satan uses. And I don't know where you are with Satan and the devil and this and that, but I'm a pretty big believer. I'm pretty much convinced that, he's real. So if you want to talk about that later, we can. But from this passage, I'm going to share some things with us that I think we see in this text that we should be on the lookout for in our own lives. All right, so the first one is this. Satan attacks Jesus when he was vulnerable. Notice that? Satan attacked Jesus when he was vulnerable. He was alone. He was hungry, right? And that's when Satan came after him. And that's when Satan comes after us, when we're vulnerable. So when are you vulnerable? When are you spiritually vulnerable? Right? When are you most likely to give in to temptation? Where is that? Who are you with? When is that, during the day or during the week? Because I can pretty much guarantee you that in those times you can count on Satan in some way, however it happens, to be there, to show up. Okay? Secondly, we see that Satan tries to get Jesus to focus on his physical needs instead of his spiritual needs. Right? So Satan says, "Hey, Jesus, I see you're pretty hungry. Why don't you just turn those stones into bread and everything will be okay? Right? So Satan's trying to get Jesus' attention out here instead of in here. And think about how Satan does that with us. How much time do we spend on things out here? I mean, anything, right? Versus, compared to how much time we spend in here. I mean, let's think about this morning. Like, how many of you got ready for church this morning? Yeah, everybody, right? I mean, we all got dressed. We all had breakfast. Maybe if you eat breakfast, I don't know. But how much time did we spend in getting ready in here this morning? Because my guess is many of us, especially if you have kids, you're like, all right, kids, time to go. Let's go. Everybody hurry up. We're going to be late. And by the time we get here, we're really ready for worship then, right? How much time do we spend out here versus how much time are we spending in here? Thirdly, Satan tells Jesus several half-truths. Oh, he does this a lot. Many half-truths. So he says, if you're really the Son of God, that's true. Then, go ahead and jump off or whatever, right? So like there's a truth and then there's something that's not really true. Jesus knows it's not God's will to test him or whatever, right? So think about the half-truths that Satan tells us. You'll have to think about what those might be for you. I'll give you one example that I think we see a lot, and that is this. A half-truth is this. Well, you're a Christian, and so you're saved, and, God loves you, and because God loves you and forgives you, and there's grace, and there's all this kind of stuff that, if you go ahead and do this, or if you go ahead and do that, or whatever it may be, don't worry about it. Even if it's sinful, it's going to be okay because there's love and grace. That's a half-truth. There is love and grace. God does love us. God does forgive us. But sin hurts us. I mean, we can do things to ourselves and other people that are very, very hurtful, spiritually and in so many other ways. And so one of the things that Satan does is he tells us these half-truths, and the next thing we know, we're halfway in and we're halfway out, and then we're all the way in. And we don't even realize it, right? One more. And that is that Satan makes Jesus a promise that he cannot keep. Satan is always offering us these promises that he can't keep. He says, takes them all the way up and he says, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. Well, guess what? They aren't his to give away, right? Now, there's another passage that says, Satan is the prince of the earth. I mean, he theologically, he kind of has temporary control of things around here. That's kind of creepy, isn't it? But you know what? The world's not Satan's to give away to begin with. And so he's constantly making promises that he can't keep. And we experience these in our lives, and you need to think about what they are for you. But it could look like this. It could look like, if I just had that newest video game, I would be so happy then. I won't bother my parents at all anymore, ever, for the rest of your life. If I just had that video game, I'd be so happy. And I'm just kind of picking on, whoever plays video games, I guess. Or if I just had a car like Steve has. I don't know who Steve is, but he must have a nice car. If I just had a car like, instead of my nice, not so nice, fuel efficient, economic, if I could just have one of those, I would be so happy, and then for the rest of my life. But we know it doesn't last. It doesn't last. And it doesn't last because it's not happiness. It's not the kind of happiness that God has for us. It's not the kind of joy that God has for us, right? So, a couple other things that I want to mention about this passage, and then we're not even going to sing anymore. I'm just going to pray and we're going to be done, if that's okay, because it's almost time. A couple of other points I want to make. When we look at the way Satan tempted Jesus, we see that there's kind of three major categories, right? And all of these apply to us, okay? The first one is the first way he tempts Jesus, what we call with his passions. And by passion, we don't mean to be passionate about sports or to be passionate about your job or schoolwork or something like that. By passion, we mean our physical desires. Our physical desires. Jesus was hungry. He offered him bread, meeting us at that level. I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today who was talking about how many Mountain Dews they used to drink, and they totally gave up Mountain Dew and quit. And can you imagine all that caffeine and all that sugar and not having it anymore? Have anybody ever tried to give up caffeine or sugar? It's hard, and you realize. So that's one of the ways Satan tempts us, is with our physical desires, right? The second way is with our pride. If you're really the Son of God, right? If you're really the Son of God, now here's the thing. We all like to feel important to some extent. We all like to feel loved, but it can become a problem. I mean, it can get in our way, right? Satan says to Jesus, if you're really the Son of God, so he's kind of testing him, right? Well, pride is putting ourselves in God's place. Right? Pride is putting ourselves in God's place, saying that we know better than God does. Right? That we're smarter than God. And then the third way that Satan tempts Jesus is with power. Power is our desire to be in charge or in control. And we love power. I mean, power makes us feel so good, right? It plays itself out in different ways. But those are the three ways. Passion, those physical desires, pride, our ego, our sense of importance, right? And power. Satan tempts us with this desire to want to be, in charge of our lives and in control of things, or maybe even in charge or in control of somebody else's life, right? So here's what we're going to do to close this morning. I want to encourage you during the season of Lent to think about some of the things that I've shared, to think about this passage, to think about how Lent is not just acknowledging our sinfulness. That's where we begin. And the reason we have Lent is because if we didn't have Lent, let's be honest, it's like flossing, right? Unless you're in the habit of doing it, it's probably not going to happen very often. I'm just saying, I do. But the reason we have Lent is so we can be intentional about examining our spiritual life, because our spiritual operating system, it gets out of whack. And so the second part of Lent is crying out to God like David did and saying, God, I need a clean heart. I need a new heart. And I can't fix myself, so I need your help. So during this season of Lent, I hope you'll do that.